Hello, I am Angelyn Spignesi, Coptic Arden, and I'm summarizing here my lyrical analysis of chapters 10 through 13 of Jane Eyre. Now, as I discussed in my introduction to the series, I worked with about a quarter of this novel since that part does correspond to Bronte's lived experience, and her gift was to go to the unconscious of her experience and bring that back, which still is informative to us in the 21st century. She was able to meet and describe archetypal forces that inform readers many generations later, since such forces cross through history and culture. So we have here, in ways I've been delineating, a study of the Reed and Brocklehurst possessions, the seizing by archetypal forces, the submitting to them, and the disengaging from them in a way that humanizes and relativizes them. The work Jane Eyre shows this movement as occurring with the necessity of a relationship to Christ and his teaching. Bronte's understanding of the deficiencies of Christian ministers at that point was shocking. And yet her understanding of Christ is something that goes very deep and informed me, even in ways I didn't realize at the time I was writing the book. And when it comes to the Rochester possession, I claim that Bronte could only go part way into it while leaving hints, since she herself never traversed that fully. Her erotic attachment to Aguirre in Belgium was the origin of her understanding of the Rochester possession. But we remember she stopped her fervent letters to him and picked up her pen and wrote Jane Eyre. Yet one could claim that she never fully emerged out of that possession. Perhaps she stopped at the depression level of it, which emerged in her novel Villette. Jane Eyre was written in 1847. Freud was not born until 1856. Bronte could not negotiate Rochester's mad female side, his mad wife, in the attic. It was not the time in history that anyone could do so. Yet with the fullness of a century of psychology behind me, as well as insights from my practice, and knowledge from literature, philosophy, and religion, I asked, what if the madwoman had not been killed off and could be dealt with psychologically? I knew that only such a negotiation of the attic's madwoman would complete a humanization of the Rochester possession and an emerging through and beyond it. Now, Bronte's hints about such in the novel are noteworthy. She has Jane go to the Rivers, the home of the Rivers, and experience the working and living of a truly Christian life. The novel ends with Reverend Rivers quotes from Revelation in a letter to Jane, and the last word of the novel is Jesus, as Jane and Rochester bear offspring. And what is interesting is that in my own life, after I finished this book, the only way I could complete a working through and out of a Rochester possession was to relate to Christ. The Rochester possession is more complicated in some ways than the ones leading to it, since the erotic element in it leads to different depths of disorientation and chaos. To fully negotiate the Rochester possession, the quote-unquote mad female side has to be dealt with in order to bring the otherworldly wisdom to body and out to the world. Eros, to and through agape. Jane Eyre registers such a process in hints, yet could only go as far as splitting Rochester and his mad wife, as well as splitting Rochester and Rivers. This is why I stopped where I did in the novel and rewrote the ending, where I have Jane and Mad Bertha leave the mansion and go through their similarity and difference and heal the madness. However, at the time of writing and finishing my book, I was disillusioned by the upheaval of political events at the Catholic university I had left, as well as the burgeoning scandal in the church, of which I was becoming more and more aware, though it wouldn't become public until over a decade later. Yet my living in the depths with this novel, along with what I was learning through my practice, did show me that encountering and surviving certain archetypal forces necessitates spiritual guidance. So Bronte was instrumental in bringing me to my vocation of bringing my findings in depth psychology to Christianity, which I did in my next book, The Articulate Silence of God. But first we'll meet Rochester. I'll leave it to the listener here to refer to my book, Lyrical-Analysis, The Unconscious Through Jane Eyre, for details of my psychological reading of chapters 10 through 13, which I'll generally summarize here. And that will follow with parts of the lyrical analysis of chapters 12 and 13. So here's a general summary of my lyrical analysis of chapters 10 through 13. The hygienic condition at Lowood was very bad, and the deprivations there led to a typhus scourge, killing many of the girls. The public takes notice, and Brocklehurst is demoted to a treasurer only, and the place improves under the leadership of more benevolent others. So Jane's lessons of not negatively reacting to and retaliating for the Brocklehurst attack did lead to her exoneration, as well as a healing of the place brought upon by conditions outside her control or action. Jane advances in all subjects, including her faith, and moves from student to teacher at Lowood, with Miss Temple as a constant companion and then a friend. So as Brocklehurst is humanized and diminished, Miss Temple becomes on Jane's level, beloved companion, and the grip of Mrs. Reed slackens entirely. Jane's affairs are no longer her business. When Miss Temple marries and parts, when one is ready to move out from the Temple place, there is the opportunity to lower to body. At that point, one first meets a strong, driving will to go to the next place, the larger body, and Jane paces feverishly, thinking what to do next, trying to will it. And finally she just lays down, and a, quote, voice of conscience, end quote, emerges as a call without, informing her of the next step out. Now the leave-taking from Lowood requires reviewing the contents of the Gateshead trunk, the prior landscapes, bringing the past forward, which is a Bessie visit. This represents the culmination of the Lowood lesson of division, finding the relationship between all the different parts of one's recessed consciousness, even the most remote, catching them up. One moves to the next place by bringing forward the older parts, not splitting from them. Now, Jane is not guarded or guided in the passage to Thornfield, as she had been in the move to Lowood. Moving to Thornfield is a beginning lesson on using the will, educating it. Mrs. Fairfax and Thornfield are a composite of qualities of both Lowood and Gateshead. Here at Thornfield, Jane looks herself over for the first time and then goes out and looks at the mansion. So here at this place, one is ready to have a first view of the exterior self and surrounds. The move to Thornfield is a move to a sensate, textured place. Here one is descending back down and through body from the Lowood Temple place. One has to take the risk in moving back down to body, the body which had been attacked and traumatized, before one can move out of the Lowood lessons to the world. Now that descent involves the education of the mansion's extravagant and passionate child, Adele. The education of where one's passion is still a child is a return to body, which entails a return to a red room. Jane enters the drawing room of crimson and white, what she describes as fire and snow. So after Lowood, the red is more balanced with white. There is a Mrs. Fairfax guide who has Lowood qualities of propriety, boundary, and care. So when one returns to a red room, after Helen's teachings on Christ and Miss Temple's practice of such, it is a Thornfield drawing room, and one is not seized by unconscious forces from death worlds. One enters the body after Lowood with a conscious attitude of boundary and spiritual guidance, and is not as permeable and liable to possession by the imps, fairies, and phantoms of the place, the ancestral and unconscious passions of it, seen in the third story overview. Taking Lowood down to Thornfield is a walk through the unconscious body without being taken. Behind it all, yet most immediately in front of one, is the preternatural laugh, locked up. When Jane hears this laugh, Mrs. Fairfax orients her to see it as average, ordinary. Jane does not become disembodied or possessed by it, yet also, after Gateshead, she knows the validity of such a laugh. Jane eventually paces within her own tale of imagination along the third-story walkway, and she begins longing to embody this imagination in the larger world. Now, she is grounded enough at Thornfield not to keep rising above the third story as did Helen. She carries out the letter to be posted. A coldness and loneliness informs this passage. At the midpoint of it, Jane is sitting on the stile. Here is when an animal spirit breaks through, the forces erupting after Lowood and the descent back into body in the wider world are spirits that are animal. She hears the approach and imagines a north of England spirit, a haunting horse or dog. On the stile, Jane encounters a terrestrial, textured spirit, willful, driven, wanting its own way. The residue of Gateshead impulse now appears through the will. It is a driven will that breaks out through this move down and out. Jane's Thornfield lesson is how to transmute driven will to consenting will. It is an erotic moment when the woman bringing the narrative from the place of ancestral spirits down and out collides with a male-inspirited force that no longer can go in its own direction. Rochester's horse slips on the ice and he falls off it. Holding Jane's shoulder, he limps back and onto his horse. It is Rochester's mansion, as it turns out. That it is his mansion is also how he is a composite of Reed and Brocklehurst qualities, choler and severity, as he is other than such a composite. He later asked to see Jane's drawings, which are otherworldly, and I found these drawings correspond to images in Milton's Paradise Lost. The entry of Rochester brings private images done at Lowood, which had been pacing third story, closer to the ground floor. He is the necessity of anger, bitterness, and irritation in this movement of private imagination to public body. Rochester is taken up to the revelation of otherworld through Jane's drawings, dialogue, and presence, and she descends from the third to second to first floor, which he mostly inhabits. The exchange of otherworldly and manifest worlds is a dialogue with whom is one's complement, which returns both with Venusian erotic feeling to the heart, the essential midpoint and fulcrum of all our passages. Rochester's defense to Jane's living of Christ's guidance is also a problem in his history, which he has locked up, and he tells her to go to sleep. The unlocking of his secret madness, the necessary betrayal by the father sending his son to the southern regions, to the depths of an intimate female nature. The place also of mother-daughter shared madness is what I then cover in rewriting the end of the novel in a section called Restory. Now I will read sections of my lyrical analysis of chapters 12 and 13, and I will say quote, end quote, when I quote from the novel. Here are parts of the lyrical analysis of chapter 12. Gift of imagination, current of internal passage ready to expand out. This time it is not too soon. Mrs. Fairfax knows we are ready. Sensing the pain of our labor, she hands us the letter. Our road is lonely. The way we take our steps out of the Thornfield structure to what is world is through a loneliness. Intense loneliness becomes this self-initiating move from interior to exterior, and we begin to move faster to warm. At Gateshead, there was no interior to move exterior, only a blast and seizure to remove us out. At Lowood, there was an interior negotiating blast, yet needing a summons out when ready. The sun sets, and we are accustomed to this solitude, as the landscape here says still. Quote, "The stripped hawthorn and hazel bushes were still as the white, worn stones which causewayed the middle of the path." Still as stone our landscape, bears no apparent animation, yet cool stone path. The move to world through Thornfield is where nothing moves or summons us from without. Yet having traversed and withstood the interior, we move the letter out on a white, cool path. Hard ground, not a leaf rustle in this landscape. Quote, "whose best winter delight lay in its utter solitude and leafless repose," end quote. We have learned to listen to landscape, what is message? And as we embark to the world now our January ground says still. We find our way out, some expansion, through the frigid constriction. We do not abandon constriction once at Thornfield in order to expand. Yet, instead, we know one through the other. Our way out does not require a heated, assertive movement. Instead, we slow, contract as we move out, contractions in delivery. We make it to the 1 mile halfway point to the town of Hay. We are going very slowly as we take in through all the senses. To deliver the letter is to become embodied. We take the message through all our senses, and from the surround. It is a midpoint transition, and we still to a stop. Sit on stile, constrict. 3 o'clock. Mid-afternoon church bell toll halfway to Hay, middle of this hill, inclining to the town at dusk. The setting sun transits to moonrise. We turn from our westward sunset Thornfield view to the eastward Hay chimney outline. We are at the transition point, midpoint of our transition to terrestrial world, and we do not struggle against the midpoint. We ease toward and then sit in it. We do not charge through, nor do we pace within it. We are sitting in it, January, late afternoon, of a hard, lonely ground. To move through the threshold to what is dimming and of moonlight is to move out. Here is not flamboyant or brilliant entry to world, city life, even as we had paced in longing for the hub. Instead, frozen ground. We have been sheltered and still. For very long learning lessons, we move out through the same cold, so much the element of what has fortified us. The causeway ices. We stop at the midpoint where the wall between the worlds is thinnest, where threshold shifts transpire. We stop at the midpoint because something in this cold January day has told us we cannot rush our way directly to Hay. It is not up to us entirely. Here the sun sets. The sun was so lucid and dry at Lowood, we felt it in our eyes, luminary, and we rose to it until the waves calmed and we were rocking ever so gently as the cooling sun found her way to set over the hill departing. And we are sitting in some transition point, still on stile. Atmosphere shifts, and what is this? Moonrise. New guide of eastern moon, also cool yet humid, becoming the fathomless dark this moon desires, are crossing to another side, other side, outer side. We've come from a place where everything calmed to a point that all began to blend. Towns hub a murmur, murmurs of life from the town. They are currents, currents of whispers. Hub, wheels, circling town, whispers, cycling to sough of streams. Tinkling blend to swirl of, quote, soft way wanderings, end quote. Pastels, and we do not need to distinguish. The becks were once furious, but now they gently weave. And where their streams will take us, we do not know, and we fall under their ring. Rings, and we are falling under blending. We are sitting halfway out on a stile when the rings encircle to our drift under. It takes this absolute suspension, but we only know that afterwards. Absolute suspension for a previously unseen, unknown force to crash through the scene of so many pastels, its mountain melting into its sky we cannot distinguish. But what is this? Head alert now. Rude noise, great dark oak splitting what was pastoral landscape. We snap forward to what clatters out, perhaps the animal trampling. When we stop on stile, it comes upon us. If we let it pass completely, and another 8 years at a needlework while pacing third story to eccentric laugh repressed. We are halfway out delivering, and huge animal forces come upon us. We are ready to let it by as guy trash, mere child fantasy, anesthesia to its rippling effect. After all, what does this force have to do with us? We are ready to let it go by as guy trash, but then we see the human on the horse. When we attach to a human component of the animal energy galloping through some iced causeway, the horse falls the man down at our feet. When we had left the Thornfield litter, we do not stop its seizure by a preternatural force. Yet what is the human encasement of that force, now incarnate, stops at us? We meet what first appears unbridled animal power with reticence, even restraint. Do not flag it down. Do not prop ourselves up for its notice. But as we begin to feel it pass through, we stay as still as causeway ice, locating what is human of it, which halts in front of us. Ice of the causeway allows the animal forces to be humanly related. She is cool, has learned all the Lowood lesson. Coolly she contains these animal energies. She does not attach to them herself or go under them. The ice is what does not let the animal force move away from her direction. And she recognizes this force as she is stunned by it. When we start out on the causeway to that wider world once seen from our battlemented fortress, some thrusting, willful drive wants to go its own way and is not in touch with the natural conditions. Driven through all frostbit air and heated flank, and the hooves are not wisely connected to their ground. Too fast, it thinks itself beyond the natural. Crash. Quote, commonplace human form, end quote, no guy trash. The writer is that moment of humanizing what would be preternatural. And now I have a lyrical section. At first they are indistinguishable, with the brooks lapping the wind's gentle caress, until louder, gradually more hoof on stone, rhythmic clatter, and something once blending gets interrupted, rude noise, split attention to what is long-haired, now gliding, now snorting, and we begin to yield to what may be preternatural force coming upon us, splitting our pastoral scene. And something in us surrounds this dashing animal as we are immediately afraid of being overtaken by it. We remember the tales we have heard. This stallion has its legend. Then we see man as writer, and we seek his human dimension. We are about to go our own way, iced white stone path, for we have seen the mere human, and he loses charge, hoofs striking ice, sparks to crash. Can we approach what limps? Back to the lyrical analysis. At our first steps halfway to town, in a pause, a great-willed force surfaces. Energies which had been dormant behind horizon now gallop out into some suspension in what is outer world. We are stunned that this rhythmic animal flank has any relation to what we know is human, at all. Yet we have known what is ice long enough that we halt this force, call it down in front of us. Perhaps we have been by a Thornfield trap door too long, desiring our human counterpart, other part from other outer side when the ice fells it, a man who we approach. Can we help? The only way we have known to relate to who can ride this animal is to minister, a nursing. We are ignored, our sweet bonnet, our gentle inquiry has no entry to his cursing, to this clamor, dog baying, bridle clanging as the hoofs strike again this ice, so the horse resumes some posture. Our approach has no effect, does not get noticed, yet we stay on. Our letter is forgotten as we appear paltry in front of this driving aspect. Our approach has no effect, yet we stay on. We know when we are being introduced to a figure who marks our fate. We should be on our way, but we are captured too in this scene and we hesitate. For we have a, quote, vocation to renew inquiries, end quote, here with this one. It becomes an issue of vocation to address this figure, even as he waves us away, another part of our calling. He thinks at first it does not pertain to us. He was passing us by in a great force. We were a pallid and passive Quaker-looking girl, quietly situated in the lane. Yet his dog runs over for our help. Quote, there was no other help at hand to summon, end quote. There are no other humans around when the will, long latent from the other sides of our horizon, finally erupts. It comes from a great solitude, which finally we are bringing out to the world. The man-riding animal energy charges out of a great solitude, within which we are moving out. When we carry out the solitude, not move out of the solitude, but carry it out, the will emerges as riding animal. And this force is a match for some sound signification of energies as we had been pacing hidden, which is why our attention is halted here. What has been lingering latent in our long institutional and domesticated solitude emerges when that solitude hits world. Huge animal energies cracking through, understood first as only magico-spiritual, yet the nested past also requires a second look to what is human and can be articulated in force. We lost Helen to learn human limit. We have ground floor years of needlework, second look to what is human in force now. And we sense a rider of middle height with a large breadth of chest, dark-faced, and his eyes and brows are of ire when there are no other humans around. We approach him and ask of his injury. He is in his own monologue, swearing as determined to proceed, here heaving the horse on feet, the dog silenced, and he takes the place on the stile from where we have just risen. He limps, saying it is a sprain. He sits where we have warmed the stone. We break his monologue, requiring interlocution. Because we have arrived at where we move out the letter, we advance to dialogue with what has burst out of horizon. In beginning a dialogue, we switch places, allowing varied perspective. We switch places. Our first encounter with the new figure forecasts what we are to serve for one another. He is dark and angry and in his own direction, but now he must sit. The impact of his force on our causeway path stops him to sit, and we are energized. We ask again, quote, questioning him against his will, end quote. Can we do anything? Going counter-will is what allows articulation of what would have remained driven force from unconscious margins. Moving counter to will that comes out, long unconscious as we deliver, to speak it moves against its direction, which is to speak to it, which leans toward consenting, not driven will, which moves us to action. Handsome or gallant would have been antipathetic, but his qualities hold for us sympatheses, and we want to know what would be the forceful drive, felled. His qualities reside as potential. They reside between us, and it becomes our vocation to renew inquiry. Mrs. Reed's male forces had direct contact with us. John Reed's search for us, then assault. Mr. Reed's luminous seizure from above. Brocklehurst's column moralistic preaching at us. This male writer is not out of any Reed history, more of margin. He comes out of the twilight moving in another direction, and he waves us to go on when we pause at his side. Sometimes when they appear, they do not want to know us. As with Helen and Miss Temple, we have to learn how to announce ourselves to the ones outside of Mrs. Reed. When they emerge from the dusk of what we think we lack, for which we long, when they seem to mark our fate, we have to work at getting their attention. We have looked him over, felt attracted, sympatheses. We hold our station when he waves us to go on. We are ready for a Rochester exchange only when we have a post. Grounded, Thornfield with its battlements. Fortified, we have a post. We are salaried. We have looked the place over and settled in. Post. His relation is to the animal, and it comes from the horizon overpassing limit, and we need to be grounded in fortified post before we venture toward the horse when he asks it of us. Required to have nothing to do with it, so we would not attempt now to negotiate this head of the horse if that man were not there. The steam from its flanks, rolling eyes as hoofs stamped and then lifting, no, this an unfamiliar, quote, spirited thing, end quote. We cannot take the bridle of Rochester's animal, which is why he has fallen at our feet. We are called to the Thornfield psychic state, its residence, its galleries, its attic and ground floor dimensions, before we meet its figures, the ones corresponding to that aspect of the landscape housing us. We enter Thornfield through the side door, and some radiance is there, reflected off purple draperies, and hear some joyful sounding of voices, including the child's. We carry the animation into the old earthly residence, and the previously shut down purple dining room is lit up. We approached and engaged the causeway incident of, quote, of incident, life, fire, feeling, end quote, and it is carried back and is already in the house when we re-enter. Some energy source where there was none before in the inner chambers where we reside. Something deeply internal and bodily alters when we negotiate the incident on the lane, when we have set out finally. She senses its presence through the ruddy atmosphere permeating the hall and the lower steps of the oak staircase. If they are the next ones marking our fate, and if we have made the introduction properly, they will be there when we return home. We do not have to worry about losing them. They have a place in the house. Perhaps they knew the place long before we did. It is his house, and we were here all along. The psychic landscape of Jane and Rochester overlapped, so they ran into one another on a causeway. Here ends the lyrical analysis, or parts of it, of chapter 12, and I will now move to the lyrical analysis of chapter 13. Or I should say, parts of the lyrical analysis of chapter 13 in a way that maintains its consistency. Okay, here it is. Fully shining on his face, fire as we enter, wrath of a John Reed sort, yet neither unharnessed nor concupiscent. Here also severity of critical detachment, harsh as Brocklehurst, yet not minimizing. Instead, he draws us out. Reed and Brocklehurst flicker through this man's, quote, harsh caprice, end quote. He is someone including them as he is someone other. To descend from the image forces of our private tutoring, we need a ceremony of choler. We are called down by bitterness and irritation, which is a critical detachment residing within what is crimson recess. Choler within a critical grim stare, in the, quote, forced stiff bow, in the impatient yet formal tone, end quote. Kohler within a critical, grim stare we first face, and Mrs. Fairfax chatters, consoles, compliments. Mrs. Fairfax is the immediate attempt to avoid his Kohler through compliment once we have descended to it. Kohler even harnessed rage when we stepped out on the causeway. It came up, crashed, forerunner of this ceremony, requiring descent to Red Room desires, less privacy. Yet, Miss Temple's brooch, armored to face Kohler, even rage harnessed foreign body. He is not related. Impatient formal tone, he does not want to relate to us at the moment, and he will not be taken in or flattered by the Fairfax chatter. We prefer this harsh caprice to finished politeness. It is more sympathetic with qualities desiring manifestation, for we have been too homogeneous, domesticated, preserving needlework, only frenzied rise, pot of porter, even their staid appearance. When we have been too homogeneous, we have not known what manifests of latent contents our desire, his Kohler, releases. Rochester, who came up when we were moving out, calls us down. In order to move out, we first need to go down and into a red room, not leave it there Gateshead encrusted, but return down. There is some anger and bitterness here. Rochester calls us down. Rochester calls us down through a piquant eccentricity, and we either console the sting in the Fairfax manner or ask from it a gift, as it does Adele. The one who summons us down, after our Lowood stare has congealed to unwelcome thought, does not want to give out anything. He does not want to hand our gift to us. We lower private images to a more public world through who will not implant, gift. Less sheltered, though we wear the brooch, we can cringe or console or ask for our gift from him, or else we can speak directly to him from what already is our present. Rochester does not come to gift. He arrives after we have located gift ready for delivery as part of that labor. The dialogue would not ensue. He would not invite us closer to fire if we were at the place of desiring from him the gift, which would maintain it an exterior affair, pertaining only to a need for approbation, only to our person's need to be defined and approved exterior. Our Lowood training is relevant to him, for he has seen our face from another world. He implies he recognizes us from another world, yet is himself of this one. Mr. Lloyd saw double worlds simultaneously, yet summoned us back to the natural. Rochester is for whom we serve entry to another world, world of fairy tale, of bewitchment. We are not there to draw him out. It is his drawing room. We are who invite or turn him to another world as he summons us down and through, which is a move out to this world. Well trained in another world, for the ruptures have lent us uncanny forces. Gateshead window seat, red room, nursery, gray field to Lowood trainings. We were tenacious to desire's force, imaged gift of imagination, now awaits delivery. And this one may be some sort of instrument. He broke through twilight reverie, but only if he sees through the way we carry another world. And yes, perhaps they are men in green. Where we recall for him the green men, we are in the red room to which he calls us, recalls woman's recess. And the men we carry to him are green. Complement switch gender is where the man and woman color complement. It is the dream-revealed nature of our imaginal eye which stops him, pronounces his limit. When he sees our paintings, he asks, quote, "And what meaning is that in their solemn depth?" End quote. Solemn depth limitation his own, and he is irritated. He does not want us to carry him to those other realms as he demands it. He claims us gifted as commanding us to put to sleep Adele, who wants gift. The one who desires gift from another is not necessary in the room anymore, even must be carried out. Later, Mrs. Fairfax responds when we name him peculiar. We hear he is broken from father, yet still bond in bitterness. He has been the son not chosen. Father and the favored elder brother, chosen son, took steps to obtain wealth for the younger son, which were, quote, not quite fair. Old Mr. Rochester and Mr. Rowland combined to bring Mr. Edward into what he considered a painful position for the sake of making his fortune, end quote. Our gift he turns away from. He will defend from the revelation of images of dream, will not rise to where he hears her laughter preternatural cackle. Yet perhaps through the drawings, crimson drawing room laced with a green possibility, he sees we have brought her down anyway. We will meet her, even have known her all along, though we too deny the memory from the red room. In order to enter now, we carry her down with the instrument to reveal her unconscious, then electric, then furious, yet he tries to say, go to sleep. Well, here ends Lyrical Analysis of Chapter 13, and then, as I said, I wrote the re-story. And this also ends this series. I thank you very much for listening.